Good evening. I am so thrilled to be with you this evening for another episode of Live Well Sister. It is your girl, Marcie Thomas, the founder of Brown Girl Collective, and of course, Live Well Sister. This is a lovely space where I invite beautiful, bold, and brilliant Black women to come and talk about things that will help us all to live our lives better, whether it's in our finances, our careers, our spiritual relationships with God, our relationships with others, and a plethora of other ways in which we can all strive to be the best that we can possibly be. And tonight is no different. And actually, I didn't tell her this, but tonight's guest is the first guest that I've had that we've actually talked about our careers and our lives in the workplace. So this is a first, and this is an opportunity for us to learn how to live well in terms of how we work, where we work, and how we deal with others. So without any further delay, I want to go ahead and welcome Jennifer R. Farmer, who's our guest for the evening. She is an author, trainer, and small business owner, and the host of the award-winning United Women in Faith Talks podcast, which offers spiritual growth content for women of faith. She is also the author of First and Only, A Black Woman's Guide to Thriving at Work and in Life, which we'll be talking about extensively this evening. And she's also the author of Extraordinary PR, Ordinary Budget, a Strategy Guide. In addition to her books, she is an essayist whose writing focuses on everything from faith to leadership development to issues of gender and race. She's also the founder of Spotlight PR, a boutique firm specializing in communication strategies for leaders and groups committed to social and racial justice. She is the founder of the Center for Social Justice Leadership, which exists to support leaders and organizations in creating more inclusive workplace cultures. So as you can see, she's a very busy woman, but Jennifer is most proud to be called mom and devotes herself to her two children as well as her two four-legged children. So without any further delay, welcome to the room. Welcome to Live Well Sister, Jennifer R. Farmer. Welcome.
Thank you, Marcie. Thank you for creating space for this conversation.
Absolutely. And as I say, you are a first because, it's important that we have these conversations. I'm so glad that you're here to talk to us about work and our workspace because it's a big part of our lives.
Definitely.
So, what was it that inspired you to write First and Only? And then here's the hard copy, and then there's a paperback that's coming out shortly. So, what was it that actually inspired you to write this story of First and Only?
When I started working on First and Only, I actually started it as a journal, and I was examining some of the feedback that I was receiving at work, and I was trying to make sense of it. And as I started writing this journal, I shared it reluctantly with a friend of mine who's an editor, Pepper Chambers. And when she read it, she said, "Oh my God, this is my story." And so I thought, okay, my experience is resonating with someone. What are the chances of that? And then I realized that the more I talked to Black women and the more I observed how Black women were treated online, in workplaces, and academia, I felt like, okay, this is a story that needs to be told more. And when I think about I've always been a consumer of leadership and business books, but
Mhm.
many of those books were not written with a Black woman in mind or written from a Black woman's perspective. And so I thought about the people who were writing in this area, and I said, wait a minute, they don't have my experience. They don't have the experience of people who look like me. So how can they tell the whole story? And I just think it's very important for Black women to continue telling our stories and outlining what we face and how we're overcoming.
Right, and it is, and you mentioned that because in the book you mentioned John Maxwell, and I think of how many people, I've read them, I've been to some of the seminars, and things like that. But the reality of it is, even though he has spaces where he trains people, he's still training from his perspective.
Absolutely.
He's not really necessarily telling people how to embrace, who they are, or there's not a lot of diversity and inclusion in terms of that piece of it. So I was like, you're so right. One other quick thing. Last year we had an event at my day job where they had all of these leadership like all these little stickers with leadership quotes from all these different people. Not one was a woman, not one was Black, male or female. And I was like, I know that there are Black leaders.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm so thrilled to know that you are stepping into this space and being able to help us navigate all of these things that we're going through. And I could resonate with a lot of what you talk about in the book as well, personally.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So one of the things about the book, as I mentioned, there's a hardcover that came out last year and a soft cover or paperback that's coming out next month, I believe, that has some additional questions and things like that. So getting into that, well, first of all, how is the book structured? And like, what is the main difference between the two if people are trying to decide whether they want to get it now or wait until the paperback comes out?
So the paperback has an author Q&A. It also has a discussion guide. When I wrote the first version, I was so excited to be telling my story, and people were asking me, okay, well, if we were to do a group, do you have a discussion guide? And I said, oh, I should create a discussion guide. So the paperback, it incorporates some of the feedback that I heard from folks, including the discussion guide. And then there was a question I received a lot of questions. When you say first and only, are you celebrating that a person is the only or they're the first? And I said, absolutely not. The title first and only is a testament to what is, not a declaration of what should be. And so it merely recognizes the fact that in many spaces, from how we think to what we've accomplished, we may be the first or we may be the only. We want to create space, and part of our work to dismantle structural racism and address it is to ensure that we no longer have the first or the only. So there were a number of questions that I received, and the paperback was my attempt to keep the content, but also include a discussion guide, an author Q&A, and to really just share more of my heart and more of my intention in writing the book.
Right. And it is definitely something that will spark a lot of conversation. And I'm sure I will be, since I have 2 copies, I'm sure I'm going to share at least one of them, maybe. With someone who I know can get something.
We'll get you another copy. So then you'll have one that you can share.
Well, one of the things, the book itself, it's broken down into 5 different areas that you kind of touch on, and then there are chapters within those where you dig deeper. Could you tell us a little bit about what those areas are, just as an overview, and then I have some specific things I want to ask about or bring up about some of those areas.
Yeah, so the way that I started the book is I wanted to tell Black women that I see you. So many times in my life, I have felt unseen. I felt that I've struggled to be seen with my family, with professional workplaces. And, most Black women who I know, they want to be seen. And we're not always seen. We're seen through the lens of the expectations that people place on us. We're seen through the lens of stereotypes that people have about us. But our authentic selves, the beauty and who God made us, that doesn't always come through. And so it was very important for me when I started writing this book to tell Black women, I see you. It was also very important for me to write a book that specifically called out Black women, not women of color, not BIPOC, but to specifically speak to Black women. Because I feel like so many times in our life, we are told to get in where we fit in. This book wasn't written for you, but you can find something in to help you. And so I wanted to specifically name that. And that is the first section of the book. Then I wanted to highlight, when I was coming up, and Marcie, I'm sure you can say the same thing. I received a slew of feedback. Do this. Don't do this. Like, one of the things that I was told from a very young woman is don't show vulnerability. Don't show your feelings. You better not let them see you cry. You better not let them see you sweat. And a lot of that feedback was given from the perspective of helping us, but it can be really constraining. And some of it is downright unhealthy. And so the second part of the book is like things that we should resist. And so it's myths to resist, because again, at each stage of our life, I think that we should be examining, does this still work for me? Is this still true? The next part of the book is it's called Truths to Embrace. And the thinking there is like things that, we talk about the myths, but then there's things that we need to know within the depths of ourselves. And so
Mm-hmm.
I talk a lot about that. When I was writing this book, there were so many chapters, and part of my concern was, okay, are people going to keep reading? And so these broad categories really help to structure it.
Mm-hmm.
The next section, the fourth section, is really important to me because it's about healing. So many times, we as Black women, we can experience wounding or we can experience trauma, and we can go from trauma to trauma. And we may clean up ourselves, on the outside and brush ourselves off. But if we don't do that deep work, and deep work doesn't happen overnight. And
Right.
so I talk about strategies to help us heal. In this section, I talk about the importance of getting to know and being reacquainted with our inner child. I
Mm-hmm.
was just having a conversation with a dear friend of mine earlier tonight. And we were saying that sometimes you can think that you're good and that you'll be triggered, and it'll take you back to maybe when you were 9 or 8 years old. And you're like, okay, why did I react that way?
Mm-hmm.
So, um, so I talk about strategies for doing the deep healing work that really sustains us and gives us the longevity that we want. And then the final part of the book is called Pathways to Liberation, because at the end of the day, we all want to be free.
Right.
One of my favorite songs is by Nina Simone, and it's I Wish I Knew How It Would Feel to Be Free. And
Mm.
I just love that song because I think that there is something in all of us that is looking for freedom, that's looking for liberation, that's looking to feel at home in our bodies, as Dr. Tama Bryant Davis says. So those are the broad categories of the book.
Yes, thank you so much for giving us that overview because as I told you, I listened actually. So there are a couple of copies, a paperback and a hardback. There's also an Audible, which I listened to twice actually, because I just wanted to fully absorb everything because I was seeing so much and feeling so much of my own experience and the experiences of others.
Yeah.
And I do love, the way that the book is broken down, that you can pick and read, that maybe depending on something you're going through, you can pick a section and look at that section at a particular time. So I love that. But, back to the point of centering Black women, that is so important, as I've already stated, but just so that we can understand that there's someone who sees us, that someone who understands, someone who's walked in our shoes, and understands some of the things that we may face in the workplace, whether it be, microaggressions or full on aggressions, or just the fact the hostility, as you mentioned, as many of us may be the first in a particular space and the only in a particular space, making sure that we understand that sometimes the things that we're going through, it is because you are who you are. You're not just imagining it. It
Yeah.
really is because you're there, but maybe they don't really want you there for one reason or another. So, talk a little bit about that, just as a Black woman, or maybe even from some of your own experiences.
Talk about which piece.
Just the part of making sure that you're centering some of the experiences that we have in what could be a hostile workplace.
Sure. So I shared that I have been reading. Most of us, we walk into workplaces or we enter workplaces and we really want to do a good job. We want to do a good job for ourselves. A lot of us have people who are depending on us, whether it's children or family. Some of us, we've been told a laundry list of things that we can't do, and we want to prove people wrong. And so we enter workplaces, many of us really wanting to do a good job. And we enter workplaces, and many of them are not set up for us. They're not set up for us to thrive. We enter places where we struggle to be seen. or where we experience erasure. We're contributing, but our work is minimized or it's erased altogether. And because of that, or we go to meetings and people talk over us, or we say something and it's almost like no one in the room heard it until it is uttered by someone who looks differently from us. And so, because this is many of our experiences, it was very, very important for me to not say, okay, I'm going to talk about all the things without talking about the thing. It was very important for me to name specifically the considerations that Black women have going into workplaces. Before we even think about doing our work, we think about our tone, how we communicate dissent, if we communicate dissent, how we express enthusiasm when our private lives are in complete disarray. How we wear our hair, the clothes that we wear. And some people may say, okay, well, it's 2022. Are we really having these conversations? And the answer is yes, we're having these conversations now, but we've been having these conversations for years. We are policed around our bodies. If we're too curvy, that's a problem. If we're not curvy, that's a problem. And so there's so many things that we have to factor in before we get to the technical aspects of our job. And so sometimes you can go to work and you can feel so exhausted. And then you wonder, okay, why am I so exhausted? Well, you're exhausted because you're doing the technical aspects of your job, but there's all these mental gymnastics that you have to clear in order to just function and to have like a sense of semi-safeness at work. And so that's kind of what I wanted to speak to. The other thing that was really important for me to bring out in this book is the messages that we have heard sometimes from childhood about anger. And, one of the first things that I was told when I was coming up is anger and vulnerability. But in terms of vulnerability, I was told, you don't show someone if they've hurt you. You shove it in. And what happens is when you have a history of practicing shoving something in, you become numb, and numbness becomes your state of being. And then in terms of anger, some of the messages that we've received around anger have not been helpful. For a lot of us, we have been hiding from fear of being considered an angry Black woman, even though there are things that should have us completely enraged, and that there is space to bring our full humanity. And that includes when we feel happy and when we feel upset. So those are some of the things that I wanted to speak to in the book.
Right. And, as you were speaking, some of the comments are like, true. Yes, yes, yes. Hello, somebody. You are preaching right now. Because it is so true. I'm just thinking of, of course, I have my hair braided now. Now, no one has ever said anything to me about my braided hair, but I know that there are some environments where it would be a problem. A lot of it, even though we now have the Crown Act, that it still isn't passed everywhere, is trying to make it where we can't be discriminated against because of our appearance or the way that we choose to wear our hair, things like that. Well, and when you speak to anger, that's a big thing as well, because I recently have had a situation at work where I was angry, frustrated, whatever, and, had to have some conversations about, I'm not supposed to show that I'm angry. Oh, okay.
Right.
Because now, so now it does become that thing where you may feel like, righteous indignation, as we say, whether it be about a specific situation that happens to you, or even it could be the things that are going on in the world around us, and maybe the environment that you're in, the way that the people are responding to it.
Absolutely. I remember when the terrible tragedy in Uvalde happened, the massacre at the school. And, of course, that followed numerous instances of gun violence, numerous mass shootings. And there was a part of me that felt like, okay, I just need a minute. I just can't lapse into work. I need a minute to process. And there have been so many times with Black women where we feel like we need a minute. Let me just absorb this. But sometimes people expect us to operate robotically, where we just go, 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 go. and then even deciding that you're going to push back and slow down, there can be consequences for that. So there are just so many things that we face that I feel need to be brought to the surface more. Um, and that's really why I wrote the book.
Hmm. One of the other things that, and I'm sure you can attest to it or speak to it, we see a lot of places where there is this whole thing about diversity and inclusion. But what does that really even mean? There are places where folks may, put out an initiative to say that we are trying to embrace these concepts, but are they really doing the work? Are they really prepared to do the work, to dig deeper, and to have real conversations with people to figure out why they may operate differently, or why something does impact them in a way that's different from what the mainstream or it would um, deal with that same situation.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
that is just something that I've noticed, like you mentioned in the book, that if a lot of places feel if they have an Asian that they're doing the right thing. Like I'm in Atlanta and working in an environment where there are no Black people in higher level leadership positions, but it's Atlanta. So it's very obvious that a lot of times people say that they embrace these concepts, but it's not necessarily true.
Yeah, I mean, I get really skeptical if you talk about it, but you have a department that's devoted to it, and there's one person in the department, or that department doesn't have funding. I get very, very skeptical when you mouth the rhetoric of diversity, but it is not reflected in who's on your personnel, but also who's in leadership positions. So it's very, very easy to say, we support diversity. It's something different to embody that, and not just your hiring, but in the decision making authority throughout the organization.
Hmm. Absolutely. One of the other things, and this is something I think comes up with a lot of us just in our lives in general, but also happens in workplaces, is you must be everything to everyone.
Yes. Ah, yes, yes, yes. So, I feel like when it comes to Black women, for Black women to be semi accepted, the Black woman has to be self sacrificing. She has to be self deprecating. She has to center everyone else's needs except for her own. She can't have any wants or desires that are about her or her family. It has to be putting everyone else first. When you find Black women who say, no, I have something that I want to do and I'm going to focus there, a lot of times these Black women are met with skepticism, or met with derision. There are smear campaigns. And what I tell people is one of the first things that people do if they want to tear you down is change your name. And by
Mm,
changing your name, what I mean is really attacking your character and changing how people view you. And so, for Black women who have the audacity to say, I'm going to pursue these dreams, or I'm going to take time for myself on a regular basis, not just once a year or once every 5 years. We say that, and we even say it amongst ourselves, but there is resistance. That in and of itself is a political act. And most people would accept us, or they would tolerate us if we would put their needs above our own. We see this a lot when it comes to boundaries and
yes.
outlining expectations for how we want people to be in our lives. The person with no boundaries is someone who has a lot of faux friends. And by
Mhm.
faux is like people who take advantage of you, and they take advantage of the fact that you don't have boundaries. But the minute you start to put boundaries in place, the minute you start to center your needs, that becomes a problem for some people, especially if you've operated in a way where you haven't had boundaries, or you've operated in a way where you've centered everyone else.
Mm,
Years ago, I used to write, and I would never put my name on my writing. I would give it to people. And the funny thing about this book is I saw something that happened online in terms of the treatment of Black women. I wrote about it because when I get angry, I like to write. That's one way that it is cathartic, is to put my thoughts on paper. And when I wrote this article, I my initial thought, because I had behaved in this way for so long, was who can I give this to? And I said, no, I'm going to write this under my own name. And when I think about my life, there have been so many times where I have centered the voice, the leadership, the experience, the insight of other people, even when it went against myself. And most of the time, it went against myself. And so, part of what I'm saying in this book is that we have to get comfortable centering ourselves, even if it makes everyone around us uncomfortable. And some people may say, okay, well, that's a lot. Well, when I have felt like it's a lot for me, I have sought out Black women therapists. I've sought out Black women coaches. I've sought out coaches who had done their own work, because they can walk with you and help you hold space to really come into your full self and to really put yourself first. So I feel like I've said a lot, but
No, I mean, you're hitting all the highlights. To me, that's just true. It's one of these things we go into and we think that we have to do everything. We're told from being little children, you always have to work twice as hard to get half as much. All of these things that we
yes,
hear. So some of these things are just ingrained in us. But there
yes,
does come a point where you have to say no. And yes, sometimes doing that can be risky, in some environments where you decide to put up a boundary, or, decide to, push back on some things. It can be, it can create issues, but sometimes it's like, what else will you do? Just stay there. And, as you mentioned in the book, and many of us know to be true, we carry a lot of stress in our bodies,
yeah,
and we end up sick or end up with different types of illnesses and stuff and things like that, because we are just being bombarded, not to mention whatever's going on in our personal lives. And then we come to work and there's more of the same, and adding on not just the work, not just the higher expectations, but the racism, the sexism, all of these other isms that impact us. So yes, it's important to do that. One of the things, that's one of the myths that we have to resist, trying to be everything to everybody, as well as, and this one stood out to me specifically. You're good at it, so you should do it, or you can do it because you're good at it. But just because you're good at it doesn't always mean that that's the best place for you to be. So talk a little bit about that.
So, um, a lot of times we can have talents that other people see. And maybe the talent is readily apparent to everyone around us, but maybe it's something that we just enjoy. For instance, I have a friend, and she makes the most amazing cards, and she makes them by hand. And when I receive her card, I'm excited. Before I even open it, I'm excited because it is beautiful. It is thoughtful. Her name is Teresa Todd, but her cards are amazing. And I found myself saying, "Oh, you should make this your business." And I think I even said it to her, is like, you can do this as a side hustle. You can make so much money. And she said to me, I don't really want to make it a business. It's something that I enjoy, and I do it, as whenever I think of it. But I don't need to monetize this. I can simply have this love for making cards and do it periodically. And I thought, wow, how self aware. But
Mhm.
sometimes people see us with a talent and they push us towards that thing. And then we can say, well, everyone says that I do X easily, so I have to do it. Even if doing it is not what really brings us joy. Maybe we would have joy if we did it in moderation, but it's not something that we want our career to be centered around. And so, with this advice, I'm really asking us to, and really suggesting that we get to know ourselves, and that we do what it is that's in our heart versus the talents that people may see in us, and not allow ourselves to be pushed into doing something just because it may feed us temporarily, but not really long term. And when I say feed us, I mean feed this the spirit. So
Right.
I think that we really have to know ourselves, and we have to spend time assessing um, why we do what we do, and also what motivates us, and be clear on that. And I think that'll help us from being pushed into things that may not be right for us.
Right. Right. And that could be like in the example that you gave, also in, the traditional workspace, the same thing, because a lot of times, say there may be someone who's really good, at whatever their task is, and someone says, oh, well, you should be a manager or you should be a leader, but maybe not,
Right.
because they may do good in that space, and that other space, it might not work as well for them. So, yes, that's important. Now, some of the truths that we need to embrace. This is one: fear keeps us stuck.
Yes. Yes. So when we're afraid, we don't we can make really really bad decisions, because when you're afraid, you can feel like, okay, I got to do something now without thinking through what the best thing may do. um, at work, when you're afraid, you won't speak up for yourself. You won't articulate what you need. You won't ask for what you need. And years ago, I have a friend. He's a serial entrepreneur, and I remember him telling me, if you're afraid, you will not serve the people around you well, because you'll be too afraid of whether or not they will be pleased with you, whether they'll be upset. And so, as we walk into different work situations or life situations, we really have to be aware of what the risks are, what the consequences are, but really work hard not to be fearful, because you really can't serve people well if you are mired in a state of fear. Now, this is not to say that we shouldn't have a healthy level of caution, and that we shouldn't be strategic and plan things out. We definitely should. But we also need a certain level of courage. There have been many times in my career where I've requested a pay increase, and it's always a little scary doing it. But had I not did it, that would have been me succumbing to fear versus saying, listen, I don't care if my voice is trembling when I say this.
Right.
I don't care if my knees are buckling. I'm going to ask for that raise. Now, I may not get it, but I'm going to ask. Or it could be, I'm going to tell this person that I don't like how they treated me, or I don't like how they spoke to me, or I don't like that they did this. Again, my voice may be trembling, my knees may be buckling, I may be sweating profusely. My voice may not be louder than a whisper, but I'm going to get it out. And so I just think that when it comes to work and being aware of our power and owning our power, but also advocating for ourselves, fear can keep us stuck. And it's something that we have to constantly work to overcome.
Yes, definitely. So, and my next thing was courage. So courage sets us free. So you kind of tapped into that. I recently, I mentioned I'm in a new location, and when I was getting ready to move, there were some things that weren't offered to me, but I asked for them. And then recently, because of the work that I've been doing, I did ask for that raise. And so, yeah, sometimes if you know that you're worthy of what it is that you're asking for, and you know that you're putting in the work, ask for it. Because, I mean, the worst they could do is say no, you know.
Or they can say, in order for you to get a raise, I need you to do X, Y, and Z. And so you leave that conversation with more information than you had before
Mhm.
you went in. And if they give you critical feedback like that, like, okay, I'm going to need you to meet these metrics, you can then decide if you're able to do it, or if you need to consider other options, or if you have a rebuttal, a polite rebuttal. But the thing is like, if you don't have the conversation, you really don't know. I even had a situation where I went to my boss and I asked for a raise, and I was scared because this boss was not always, she was intimidating, And so I went to her and I asked for a raise, and I wasn't prepared when I asked it. She said no. Like, as quickly as I got it out, she said no. And I thought I was kicking myself, and I said, man. And, I was a little bit discouraged. You know what happened, Marcie? A couple months later, she came back to me and she said, I know you asked for a raise. I was not able to give it to you at that time, but I am able to do something for you now. And she gave me an increase. So had I not made the ask, you know, I don't know when I would have gotten it or if I
Hmm.
would have gotten it.
Yeah, that's true. And that just speaks to something, and you touch on it in the books, not necessarily in this section, but something I'm thinking about, that a lot of times when you are a first and only, or one of a few, many times whatever people are giving you, they think that you should be happy with that, because you should just be glad to be in this space. Well, no one else has been here before. You are the first, you are the only. You should be happy with what we give you, especially as a Black person, wherein someone else, they may automatically offer them more.
Yeah, years ago, I was working in a political field, and I think I talk about this in the book. And I was being recruited to go to a different political office. And at the time, I was doing, I was making a fairly decent amount for someone in the political arena. And I talked to someone, a friend of mine, a white woman, and she was able to do some research, and she found out the position that I was applying for had been offered to a man, and he had been offered about $25,000 more than what I was going to ask for. So she told me when I had that information, it was still difficult for me to ask for that amount. She helped me negotiate, and I was able to get that amount. But one of the things the office told me is, you will be the highest paid of all the people in this position. You'll be among the highest paid. And I just sat there and I just kept quiet, because I was thinking, okay, that's not my problem. This is
Right.
what I'm asking for. This is what I need. But I remember them saying, or one person saying, you're going to be among the highest paid. No one else makes this kind of money. And I just, I had the good sense to just sit there and just to kind of nod and just like, okay, that's what it is.
Right. Well, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Wonderful. But that is something, just being, able to speak up, and have that courage to ask for what it is that that you deserve.
Mhm.
This is kind of a sidebar. This isn't in the book, but I mentioned it to you before we came on. A lot of people are using their courage to decide to walk away or to pursue something different, especially right now during the Great Resignation, as people are calling it. And talked about Beyonce had the new song that came out a couple of days, telling people, release your job, all these sorts of things. But we know that that's not always as easy. So as you being someone who was in, a traditional workspace, who now has chosen to work for yourself, just talk a little bit about that, about the whole concept of Great Resignation, and if you do decide that you want to step away, how you can kind of prepare yourself for that.
So, the pandemic it's provided a reset in a lot of different ways. And I think for a lot of people, we were going at such a fast pace that when the pandemic happened, it provided a respite of sort. And there were a lot of people who said, okay, I don't want to go back to how it was before. Or I want more out of life. Life is so short and it's so fleeting. I want more. And I think that probably spurred some people to walk away. What I would say is that, one of the things that I say in this book is that any advice that you receive, it has to be viewed from the lens of race, from the lens of gender, and also from the lens of class. And so a lot of people will say, oh, do this in order to get a raise, or do this. But you have to factor in, I think, all of those different things before you make a move, because all of those things come into play. Um, I also think that if you're someone who I tend to be reflective, and I tend to be prayerful. And when I realized that I wanted to leave my job, it just was my job. I realized that the life that I wanted, I needed to think about how to achieve it in an unconventional way.
Mhm.
And so I spent a lot of time thinking. And one of the things that I did is I called a pastor friend of mine, and I would call her regularly to complain about the job that I had. And one of the
Mhm.
things she said is, how do you know that God is not troubling the water so that you will leave? And when I have that
Mm.
conversation with her, it's almost like Marcie's like something in me awakened. And it's like my spirit knew, okay, no, it's time for you to leave. But I did not quit my job at that point. What I did is I got clear in myself that I will leave this job. And then I started thinking about what needs to be in place in order for me to leave the job. Um, what kind, and I started doing like that's when I started my side hustle. And I would do this thing where I would say, okay, well, I need to have this many clients on the side, or I need to have this projects that will pay me this amount. And I think um, maybe 18 months later was when I finally left my job. But it was after much prayer. It was after consulting someone. So it wasn't just me in the back room deciding what I was going to do. I was in
Mhm.
conversation. I was planning. I started planting little seeds. And that way, I felt like it was safer. The other thing that I want to say is that Black women are among the fastest growing population to start businesses. Many
Right.
of us, we have been leaving our jobs. Unfortunately, one of the reasons why we're doing it is because a lot of workplaces are not hospitable, are not safe, do not provide us with a ladder to grow. And so a lot of Black women are entrepreneurial. But what I would also say is that as someone who, I work for myself, I know what it's like to worry about late pays. I
Mm.
know what it's like to be desperate for people to pay you on time. It is not something to be taken lightly. And I certainly would not do it because a celebrity, God knows we love her, recommended it. I think that you have to be very thoughtful with your plan, and you have to be strategic. And even then, and the best laid plans can go awry. And so you have to, again, you have to view everything from the lens of race, gender, and class, and think about what risk you're willing to make and then what your fallback plan will be.
Thank you so much for sharing that, because when I heard it, I mentioned it to you earlier. It sounds good in theory, but in reality, there are people who can't just throw caution to the wind and just jump out and whatever without a plan. You have to have a plan, no matter how long it takes. I think it was Delatoro McNeil wrote a book a few years ago talking about being caught between a dream and a job. And in his book, it was like a 3 to 5 year plan. So it just really depends on you and your situation. So it's not to say that you can't have that dream and work towards it, and but you got to make it make sense for you and your family. So thank you
And
so
the
much.
other thing is, if you are not entrepreneurial, or if you feel like, okay, this is not for me, that is okay. So don't feel like you have to, that is the only path. It is a path. It is a great path. But work. I think all work is meaningful. And so don't feel like because your path doesn't look like someone else's that it is inherently bad. That could be where you're supposed to be for this season, and maybe in another season you'll be someplace else.
Because it may not, as you say, may not be entrepreneur, might be a different career path, or it's hard to say with that. So thank you for sharing that, because I just think that that's timely as to what's going on right now. Um, in the book, after we've gone through things that we face, the myths that we resist, the things that we need to embrace, there's also those strategies for healing that you speak of so well. One of which that I thought was really, well, actually there were three, but in interest of time I'm going to mention two. One is embracing our vulnerability, being able to embrace our vulnerability in the workplace. How does that help us to heal?
So this is it's a big one. I think that we have to be honest with ourselves about our limitations. We have to be honest with ourselves when we're hurt. We have to be honest with ourselves when we're feeling, okay, I'm just not at 100, or today I can only do 40, or I can only do 60. Um, the difficulty becomes carrying a facade, and carrying a facade repeatedly, right? I also think that when we refuse to acknowledge in safe spaces that we need help, we rob people of the opportunity of supporting us. And like I said, coming up, the older women in my life would say, you be stuck, you be tough, you be strong. Don't let them see you sweat. And that was well-meaning advice. They gave me the best they could at that time. But what that led me to do was to numb how I was feeling, and it caused me to be somewhat robotic, where I wouldn't even check in with myself to say, how does this feel? How do you feel? Are you okay? I would just keep going. And if you suppress and you suppress and you suppress, if you have like a ball under the water and you're just pressing it down, at some point that ball is going to come up, and with it is going to come water. And so I think that it's better to acknowledge where you are. It doesn't mean that every room that you walk into, you need to pour out your heart. That just wouldn't be wise, and it wouldn't be strategic. But you have to find safe places to tell someone, I need help navigating this, or I'm not sure how to handle this. This is what I'm experiencing, in this department. Please, where do I go? What do I do from here? There has to be spaces that we cultivate where we can be ourselves, where we can let our hair down, and where we can ask for help. And in many cases, there are people who want to help us, not in all places, but there are people who want to help us. And so we do ourselves and the people around us a disservice when we're unwilling to acknowledge our vulnerability. Again, I think we need to be very, very wise. But when I think one of the most damaging things that Black women have experienced is this expectation that we be strong at all places and at all times. And sometimes I say, you know what, I am going to come undone, or I'm going to tell this person no, because I am not going to feed into their belief that I can do all things at all times. I'm not going to do it. So I'm just going to say no.
Right. And that's so important. And the safe space is a big thing. In many cases, if you are the only, you may not be, and I'll be honest, even if you do have others that look like you in your space, you may need to take it outside just from the standpoint, because safe is the key word, that it's a safe place to talk about what's going on and things that you're dealing with or struggling with or trying to navigate in the workplace. So that's just important. Also, keeping work in its proper perspective, because that you work there, but it's not all that you are.
Yeah, I mean, this is another one that's been it's been an opportunity and an invitation for me to grow as a person. Some of us, we work in areas that we care deeply and we care passionately about, but work is just one part of our lives. And I had to learn that, I am not here just to work. I am here to enjoy my life. I am here to learn. I am here to discover different parts of life. I'm here to explore nature. I'm here to enjoy the human beings that are in my life, like my children. I'm here to raise them. And so work is one piece of it. It is important, but it's not all there is. Some of your audience may say, oh yeah, we have that. And that's great. But I think that there's something about our society that puts so much emphasis on what we do, on how much money we make, and on any prestige associated with that. And we are so much more.
Mm-hmm. Now, I know Miller, you're free to ask a question. I'm sorry if I did not state that earlier. Anyone, if you have a question, please feel free. We've only got a few minutes left. So if you have any questions, please drop them in the chat and we will be glad to do what we can to get them answered for you. The last section of the book is our paths to liberation. And one of them we kind of already talked about under the guise of being courageous, and that's asking for what you need despite resistance.
So, I talked about asking for a raise. I think maybe I implied this of advocating for ourselves. And we just need to know that we're not always going to be greeted with open arms. We're not always going to have people roll out the mat for us and say, oh, absolutely. Is that what you need? Yes, I'll give it to you. Sometimes people are going to look at you sideways, like, you should just be grateful that you're here. As you said, Marcie, you're the only one, and, you make a reasonable living, and you should be fine with that. But does anyone know what it feels like to be unsettled in your spirit and to really feel like, no, I need more, or I need to ask, or and so I think that we have to be willing to ask for what we need, even understanding that temporarily some people may not agree with it. They may be upset that we have the audacity to ask, but we need to ask anyway. And as I think about my life and even the struggles, I think about, okay, well, what hurdles can I clear now so that my daughter does not have to clear them? And then I think about, okay, well, who am I? Who did God make me to be? And can I rest in that? You know, as I advocate for myself, if it rankles people around me, can I rest in the comfort and knowing that that what I'm doing will help someone else, or that I'm living into to my full purpose? And so, you know, yeah, not everyone is going to greet it with open arms. Sometimes we may face resistance, but we have to do it anyway, or we can choose to do it anyway.
Right. And I think that's so important because I don't, just speaking from some of my own experiences, it's like, personally, I feel better when I ask or when I speak up. And you may not always get the answer that you're seeking, or, kind of like you stated, they may say not now, but, we can work towards, or this is what you can do to work towards, but at least it's better than, and I mean, as I'm saying this applies even in personal life. Sometimes you just got to speak up and say what you want. You can't just assume that people know what you want or what you need or what's going to make the path work better for everyone involved if you don't, say anything. So I
And
think that's
here's the thing: even if you don't get what you want, you will feel better about yourself when you advocate for yourself. And just that practice of, you know what, I'm going to go in here and I'm going to say, I'm going to make my request known. I'm going to make my petition known. And so, even it doesn't mean that you're always going to get what you want, but each time you take a step to advocate for yourself, like that's great, you know. And I remember when I told the story about asking, my boss for an increase. And initially I thought, man, she shot me down so fast. But then a few days later, I said, okay, but I had the courage to ask her. I had the courage to go in and ask. And so that's great. Now, my circle came full circle because she came back a couple months later and she did give me an increase. But I was pleased, even before I knew I would get the increase, I was pleased that I took a chance.
Sometimes you just have to take a chance on yourself.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to bring these two up because they're just so important. Building your network, which is kind of, to me, that's some of the safe space as well, building your network.
So that this is it's an interesting topic because on the one hand, many of us have been told to expand your network, right? But the underbelly of networking is the fact that a lot of times Black people and Black women, we can be disadvantaged by networks because if our friends are not in corporate positions, if our friends don't have decision-making authority, then how can they, if they can't put us onto a board? So I think that while it is important to expand the number of people who know you, I also want to be honest that networking is not the end all be all. It is important, but there are people whose networks, they can just make a call. A lot of us don't have that. And so I just want to be honest about the limitations of networking. Doesn't mean that we shouldn't be trying to build relationships, but if your network is not putting you on a corporate board or helping you find a six-figure salary, I don't want you to look at yourself and feel like I've done something wrong. I want you to look at the system and say that the system that we operate in has disadvantaged someone like me. And so my big thing is to keep it in proper perspective.
And that is true. That is true. And then it also just depends on what it is you're trying to do. Someone may not want to be on a board. We all want different things as far as our careers are concerned. So I guess for me, when I think of it, I think of just having, having people in your circle that may be on a similar path. Sometimes that's a challenge, but as much as possible. And there are ways to do that with different groups and things like that, that you can meet people, even if they can't necessarily get you a certain job, at least even the conversation that you and I are having right now. I can have it with you, but I may not be able to have it with somebody else. So if they're on a different path. So, and last but not least, probably most important, remember who you are.
Yeah, I mean, this is another big one. We receive so many messages, and when I say we, I'm speaking to Black women. We receive so many messages, and a lot of those messages are not helpful about who we are, about what we're capable of. And so I think that Iyanla Van Zant talks about the importance of knowing yourself thoroughly, and I think that's critically important. So that as you encounter these different messages about who you are and what you're capable of, you ground it with the truth, your truth. You ground it with what you know to be true about yourself, and I just think that that will help us tremendously. Even when faced with, there have been times that I've been faced with an unpleasant situation, and I've thought about how to respond. And I've thought, okay, well, I want to respond in accordance to who I am and who I aspire to be, and not letting someone take you out of character, or causing you to act in a way that is not what you want for yourself.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much. That's so important. And I really do appreciate you coming on this evening to talk about, but what day is the paperback coming out?
So the paperback will be released on July 26th, and of course, you can pre-order it now from any place books are sold. And I would love it if you pre-ordered.
Yes, pre-orders definitely help a lot. Definitely so. So if you want the additional content, which includes the questions and the discussions and all of that, it's in this one. If you can't wait, the hardcover is available, as well as the Audible, which I told you I already listened to twice. So, please pick this up, because many of us, as we're navigating our way through the workplace, of course, we spend so much time at work. It's such a big part of our lives. It gives us the resources, in many cases, a large portion of the resources that we have to be able to live and to function and even consider living well come from what we gain from our jobs. So, it's good for us to be able to be in the best possible position at work, and make sure that we're navigating all those things to make it a better, more healthy workspace for us. So, Jennifer, I appreciate you. Is there anything else that you would like to share where people can find you? Well, actually, that's at the bottom here where they can find you. But anything else you have coming up besides, or in addition to, the release of the paperback next month?
So so you can, your audience can find me. You can visit my website, jenniferrfarmer.org, and I list upcoming events. I have a few events in July. I would love if you purchase a copy of the book for yourself, and also think about someone who who needs to feel seen. This is a book, but my intention is to wrap my arms around Black women, and to say that I see you.
Well, thank you. And we see you, and we see what you're looking to do for us. And we appreciate you, Jennifer. So thank you so much for joining me. Everyone who's watched, thank you so much for joining as well. Please share this out. If you know someone who needs to hear this conversation, it will remain up on both Facebook and YouTube, so you can watch it or rewatch it, or share it out to anyone who you think needs to hear this wonderful message. So thank you again for your time. Everyone have a good one, and we'll see you again real soon. Take care. Bye-bye.